The house was supposed to be empty for the weekend. My parents drove to my sister's place in Manchester on Friday morning. Something about helping her move furniture into her new flat. They asked if I wanted to come along, but I just started the new job at the warehouse and couldn't get the time off yet. Honestly, I didn't mind. I'm 23 and still living at home to save for a deposit, so having the place to myself felt like a small taste of independence. Friday night was fine. Ordered a curry, watched Netflix, stayed up later than I should have. The house is at the end of a cul-de-sac in a quiet estate on the outskirts of town. Detached, with a long front garden and a low brick wall separating it from the pavement. The living room has a big bay window that looks out onto the street. We've got net curtains, but they're quite thin. You can see shapes and movement through them, well, pretty clearly, especially when the lights are on inside. Saturday I slept in, then spent most of the day playing games and catching up on laundry. It was getting dark around 3:30, that gray January light that makes everything look dull and cold. I'd left the living room curtains open during the day because I like the natural light, but once it got dark, I closed them properly. Not that there's much to see out there. The cul-de-sac doesn't get much foot traffic. Most of our neighbors are older couples or families who keep to themselves. I made myself some pasta around 7 and settled in to watch a film. That's when I first noticed it. Someone walked past the window. Just a shadow, really, moving left to right across the net curtain. I didn't think much of it. He could have been someone from one of the other houses going for an evening walk, maybe heading to the main road. I paused the film for a second, listened, but didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no car doors. I went back to watching. Maybe 20 minutes later, it happened again. Same direction, left to right. Same pace, not hurried. I muted the TV this time and got up to look. But by the time I reached the window and pulled the curtain back slightly, there was no one there. The street was empty. The streetlights were on, casting that orange glow over the parked cars and the pavement. I told myself I was being paranoid. It's a public street. People walk past sometimes. But my gut was telling me something wasn't right. I sat back down, but I couldn't focus on the film anymore. I kept glancing at the window. About half an hour later, the shadow passed again. Same speed, same direction, left to right. This time I got up immediately and went to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. Nothing. No one on the street. No sound of footsteps fading into the distance. It was dead silent, the kind of quiet you only get in suburban estates on a cold Saturday night. I stood there for a minute, my breath fogging in the air, looking up and down the cul-de-sac. All the other houses had their lights on, curtains drawn. A few cars parked along the curbs, but no people. I went back inside and locked the door. I thought about texting my parents, but what would I even say? Someone walked past the window 3 times. They'd think I was being ridiculous. I thought about calling the police, but I talked myself out of it. What would I report? A person walking on a public pavement? They'd think I was wasting their time. I turned the TV off and sat in the quiet for a bit, just listening. The house made its usual settling noises. The heating clicked on and off. I could hear a car in the distance, somewhere on the main road. But nothing unusual. Then it happened again. Left to right, same pace. I didn't move this time. I just watched the shadow pass across the curtain. My heart was pounding. I counted in my head, trying to time it. If someone was just walking past, they wouldn't keep going in the same direction. They'd have to loop around somehow. The cul-de-sac is a dead end. There's no through route. To walk past the window 4 times in the same direction, They'd have to be deliberately circling the house. I stood up and went to the side window in the kitchen, the one that looks out onto the driveway, whereas I kept the lights off and peered through the blinds. I waited. Maybe 5 minutes passed. Then I saw them, a figure walking slowly along the pavement. They came from the direction of the main road, passed in front of the house, and kept going toward the end of the cul-de-sac. They were wearing dark clothing, maybe a coat and jeans. I couldn't make out their face. They didn't look toward the house. They just walked, hands in pockets, like they were out for a casual stroll. I watched them reach the end of the cul-de-sac, where the pavement stops and there's just a small grass verge. They paused there for a moment. Then they turned around and started walking back. They passed the house again. Left to right, same as before. I stepped away from the window, my hands shaking. Every instinct told me to call someone, but I still didn't. I thought maybe they'd leave. Maybe they were just some weirdo who liked walking in circles. Maybe it was nothing, but they didn't leave. Over the next 2 hours, they passed the window at least a dozen more times. Always the same route, always the same pace. I stopped looking after a while. I sat on the sofa in the dark, phone in my hand, trying to decide what to do. I thought about going to a neighbor's house, but I barely know any of them. I thought about leaving and driving somewhere, but my car was parked on the street, and I'd have to walk past them to get to it. Around 11, the walking stopped. I waited in the silence for maybe half an hour, then crept to the window and looked out. The street was empty again. I checked the side window, the back door, all the locks. Everything was secure. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept expecting to hear something. Footsteps on the gravel, a knock on the door, the sound of the gate opening, but nothing happened. Sunday morning, I checked outside. No signs of anything. No footprints in the frost on the lawn. No damage. Nothing. My parents came home that afternoon. I didn't tell them. I still don't know why. I never saw the person again. I don't know who they were or what they wanted. Maybe they were just walking. Maybe it was some kind of weird exercise routine. But I can't shake the feeling that they were watching the house, waiting for something, testing to see if anyone would react. I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm home alone at night. I keep the curtains closed now, even during the day, and I've started parking my car in the driveway instead of on the street. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I'd gone outside and confronted them. Part of me is glad I didn't find out. I work in IT support at a logistics company in Slough. The job's boring, but it pays the rent on my flat. I'd been fighting off a cold for about a week, and Thursday morning I woke up properly ill. Fever, chills, the works. I texted my manager around 7 saying I wouldn't be in, then went back to sleep. I live alone in a ground floor flat in a converted Victorian house. 3 flats total. The couple upstairs both work days, and the top floor tenant is a student who's hardly ever around. It's a quiet building, which I normally like. My flat faces the street, with a small front garden and a gate. The main entrance has a buzzer system, but my door also has its own bell that rings inside my flat. I woke up again around 11 feeling awful, made myself some tea and toast, took paracetamol, and settled on the sofa with my duvet. I had my phone next to me and the TV on low, some daytime property show I wasn't really watching. The heating was on and the curtains were half closed because the light hurt my eyes. Honestly, I just wanted to sleep. Around midday, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I thought maybe it was a delivery for one of the other flats and they'd pressed the wrong button. It happens sometimes. I waited to see if they'd buzz again or go away. After about 30 seconds, nothing. I figured they'd worked it out. I dozed off for a bit. When I woke up, my tea was cold and the TV was showing some antiques program. I checked my phone. It was 1 o'clock exactly. Then the doorbell rang again. This time I got up feeling dizzy and annoyed. I went to the front window and pulled the curtain back slightly. I couldn't see anyone at my door, and the front gate was closed. The street was empty except for a few parked cars. I thought maybe it was kids messing about, though it's not really that kind of area. I went back to the sofa. My gut was telling me something felt off, but I was too ill to care much. I just wanted to be left alone. An hour later, at 2 o'clock exactly, it rang again. I stood up this time, still wrapped in my duvet, and went straight to the window. I was quicker this time. I pulled the curtain back and looked out. There was a man standing on the pavement just outside my gate. He was facing my flat. He wasn't moving, just standing there. He was maybe in his 40s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. Normal looking. His hands were in his pockets. He wasn't looking at his phone or waiting for someone. He was just standing still, staring at my building. I stepped back from the window. My heart was beating faster. I told myself he might be waiting for someone in one of the other flats. Maybe he'd rung my bell by mistake. I didn't know. But something about the way he was just standing there, not moving, made my skin crawl. I sat back down and tried to distract myself with my phone. I scrolled through Reddit for a bit, checked my work emails even though I was off sick. I kept glancing at the window. I couldn't see him from the sofa, but I kept expecting the bell to ring again. At 3 o'clock it did. I didn't get up this time. I just sat there, staring at the door. I could hear my own breathing. The TV was still on in the background, some game show with canned laughter. The doorbell echoed in the hallway and then stopped. I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? Someone rang my doorbell 3 times? They'd think I was being ridiculous. Maybe I was. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was a delivery driver or a meter reader or something. But every instinct told me that wasn't it. I got up and checked the window again. No, he was gone. The street was empty. I felt a tiny bit of relief, but also more uneasy. Where had he gone? Was he still nearby? I locked my front door, even though it was already locked. I checked the back door too, which leads to a shared garden. Also locked. I closed all the curtains properly. The flat felt darker and smaller with them closed, but I felt safer. I tried to sleep on the sofa. I was exhausted and feverish and my head was pounding. I kept drifting in and out. At some point I heard a car door slam outside and I jerked awake, heart racing. But nothing else happened. At 4 o'clock the doorbell rang again. I stayed on the sofa. I didn't move. I just listened. After a few seconds it stopped. Then, maybe 10 seconds later, I heard footsteps on the gravel path outside my window. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They walked along the front of my flat, right past the window, and stopped. I held my breath. I couldn't see through the curtains, but I knew someone was standing right there, just on the other side of the glass. I could feel it. The footsteps started again, walking back the other way, and then faded. I grabbed my phone and opened the group chat for my building. I typed a message, asking if anyone else was home, if anyone had seen someone hanging around outside. No reply. I checked the time. 4:15. The upstairs couple wouldn't be back until after 6. The student was probably at uni. I thought about calling my mom or my friend Sarah. But what would I say? I felt stupid. I was ill and probably overthinking it. Maybe it was just some confused person. Maybe they had the wrong address. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't random. At 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. This time I heard something else. A faint sound like someone trying the door handle. Just once. A soft rattle, then nothing. I stood up, still wrapped in my duvet, and backed away from the door. I went into my bedroom at the back of the flat and closed the door. I sat on the bed with my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over 999. I waited. Nothing happened for a while. I heard a car drive past outside, a dog barking somewhere, normal sounds. I started to think maybe it was over, and maybe he'd given up and left. Then I heard the back gate creak. My flat has a door that opens onto the shared garden. It's got a deadbolt and a chain, and I never use it. But I heard the gate creak, and then footsteps on the patio stones outside. I didn't move. I just sat there, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside my back door. I heard nothing for maybe a minute. Then the footsteps walked away, back toward the gate. I stayed in my bedroom until I heard the upstairs couple come home around 6:30. I heard their voices, their footsteps on the stairs, their door closing. I finally felt like I could breathe. I went back into the living room and opened the curtains. The street was dark and empty. I checked the front door. Still locked. I checked the back door. Still locked. I didn't hear the doorbell again that night. The next day I felt a bit better physically. I went back to work on Monday. I mentioned it to the upstairs neighbor in passing, asked if she'd seen anyone hanging around. She said no, but she'd been at work all day Thursday. I never found out who it was. I never saw him again. But I still think about it. The way he just stood there, staring. The exact hourly intervals. The footsteps outside my window. I don't know what he wanted or why he picked my flat. I've started keeping my curtains closed during the day when I'm home alone. I installed a video doorbell a few weeks later. And I really wish I'd called the police that afternoon. Maybe they could have done something. Maybe they would have caught him. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I'd opened the door. The delivery was supposed to arrive sometime between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. I work as a compliance officer for a shipping firm in Reading, and I'd taken the day off because it was a replacement laptop, expensive enough that I didn't want it left on the doorstep. My flat's on the ground floor of a converted Victorian terrace. And the front room has these big bay windows that look right out onto the street. Normally I'm at the office by 7:30, so I'm never home during the day. I made coffee around 9 and sat in the front room with my phone, half watching the street, half scrolling through work emails. It was a Tuesday in February, cold but dry. The street was quiet. A few parked cars, the usual. I live on a residential road that connects two main routes, so there's occasional through traffic, but not much foot traffic. Yeah, most of my neighbors work during the day, so it's pretty dead until evening. Around 10, I noticed a man standing on the pavement across the street. He was maybe in his 40s, average height, wearing a dark coat and jeans. He had his phone up like he was taking a photo. I didn't think much of it at first. People take photos of houses all the time. Estate agents, surveyors, people looking at places to rent. The terrace is old and some of the buildings are listed, so occasionally you get architecture students or whatever. He stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then walked off toward the main road. I went back to my phone. An hour later, I was in the kitchen making another coffee when I glanced out the front window and saw him again. Same man, same dark coat, standing in almost exactly the same spot. Phone up, pointed at my building. This time I paid more attention. He wasn't just taking one photo, he was holding the phone up for a while, like he was recording video or taking multiple shots. Then he lowered it, looked at the screen, and walked off again in the same direction. I felt a small twist in my gut, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was doing some kind of survey, maybe he worked for the council. There's been talk about parking restrictions on our street for months. Still, I kept the curtains half closed after that. Around 12:30, I was eating lunch in the front room when I saw him again. Third time. Same position across the street. Phone up, pointing at my flat. This time he stayed longer, maybe a full minute. I stood up and moved closer to the window, all trying to see if he was actually aiming at my flat specifically or just the building in general. He seemed to be focused on the ground floor, on my windows. I thought about going outside and asking him what he was doing, but something stopped me. He didn't look threatening exactly, but there was something off about the way he just stood there. So still, so focused. My gut was telling me not to engage. I watched him lower his phone, glance up and down the street, then walk off again. I checked the tracking on my parcel. Still no update. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? A man took some photos of my house? They'd think I was wasting their time. I told myself maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he lived nearby and was documenting something for insurance or a property dispute. But then he came back at 2, fourth time. I saw him from the kitchen this time, through the side window. He was standing in the same spot, phone up. I watched him for a full 2 minutes. He didn't move. Just held the phone steady, pointed at my flat. Then he put it in his pocket and walked away. That's when I started feeling genuinely uneasy. 4 times in 5 hours, always the same spot, always pointing at my place. I tried to think of any rational explanation. I Googled things like someone photographing my house and found a bunch of forum posts about burglars casing properties, but also plenty of people saying it was probably nothing. I texted my neighbor upstairs, asked if she'd noticed anyone hanging around. She didn't reply. She works long shifts at the hospital, probably wouldn't see the message until evening. At 2:30, I was standing in the hallway, hard away from the windows, when I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate. I moved to the front room and peeked through the gap in the curtains. He was back. 5th time. But this time he wasn't across the street. He was standing directly outside my front gate, maybe 10 feet from my window. Phone up, recording, or photographing, I couldn't tell which. He was close enough that I could see his face properly for the first time. No expression, just blank. Calm. Every instinct told me to stay away from the window. I stepped back into the hallway and stood there, heart hammering, trying to decide what to do. Call the police? Confront him? I didn't know if he'd seen me watching. I didn't know what he wanted. I heard the gate creak. I froze. Then footsteps on the front path. He was coming up to my door. I moved quickly into the kitchen. He's grabbed my phone, pulled up 999, but didn't press call yet. The footsteps stopped right outside the front door. Silence. I waited. 10 seconds, 20. Then I heard something slide through the letterbox, a piece of paper hitting the mat. I didn't move. I stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, listening. The footsteps retreated. The gate creaked again. I waited another minute, then crept into the hallway. There was a folded piece of paper on the mat. I picked it up with shaking hands and opened it. It was a printed photo. My front room, taken from outside through the bay window. I was visible in the background, sitting on the sofa with my phone. The timestamp in the corner said it was from that morning around 10, right after I'd first seen him. There was no note, no message, just the photo. I locked the door, checked the back door. He's checked every window. I called the police. They said they'd send someone round, but it would be a couple of hours. They were stretched thin, and since he'd left, it wasn't an emergency. They told me to keep the doors locked and call back if he returned. I sat in the kitchen, away from the windows, and waited. The parcel arrived at 4. I barely registered it. I didn't go back into the front room for the rest of the day. The police came around 6. I showed them the photo. They took a statement, said they'd check CCTV from the main road. But they didn't sound optimistic. They asked if I knew him, if I'd had any disputes with neighbors, if I'd posted anything online about being home alone. I said no to everything. They told me to report it if he came back. He didn't come back that day or the next. I went back to work on Wednesday, but I kept thinking about it. I still think about it. I never found out who he was or why he was photographing my flat. The police never got back to me with any updates. I asked my neighbor if she'd seen anything, but she hadn't. I moved out of that flat 2 months later. Different reasons, mostly, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't factor in. I still have the photo. I don't know why I kept it. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out what he wanted. I never got an answer.